We often try to put grief in a box. Like people expect to cry.
Right.
Although some people try not to cry, but we do know that lots of people cry with grief.
Right.
And that's one symptom of grief. It's just not the only one.
Imagine being emotionally and spiritually stronger. What would it look like to know you can be okay when hard things happen? Welcome to the Healing Her podcast. Listen in as best friends Christy and Donna share stories of God's healing work in their lives. Donna is a licensed therapist, and Christy is a veteran communicator in the marketing world. In Season 2, Healing Her Grief, they share their own stories of walking through loss, process the stages of grief, and provide some do's and don'ts to better care for grieving people. So whether you're seeking comfort, understanding, or support, Christy and Donna invite you to grab a cup of coffee and join them at the table as we navigate the challenging journey of loss and find hope on the other side.
Christy, as a therapist, my niche in therapy is I see Christian women who are walking through some type of struggle. So it's really common for me to have someone come in and just have experienced some kind of major loss, and they're like, what is going on with me?
Right.
And even asking in their faith, where is Jesus in all of this? So today we're going to be talking about some of the things that people experience that are confusing, but we're also going to normalize that you're normal and that Jesus is there too.
Oh, that's good.
So recently, a friend of mine, Jocelyn Goodwin, preached a sermon about Jesus and how he meets us in grief. And I'm just going to share a few things about the people in Jesus's life that he meets in grief after the resurrection. So Mary Magdalene, we see that she has to do something in her grief.
Right.
So she's up at dawn. She's going to go anoint Jesus's body. But we know that he's not there. So she runs back and she gets Peter and John.
So Peter rushes in to see the clothes and still thinks that they've stolen the body.
Yeah.
So he's probably in denial.
That's right. That's right. And then Mary, after that, she stays back. And we may call that isolation. This is the first time we see her cry.
Yeah.
And Jesus actually meets her there, but she doesn't recognize him because of the grief until he calls her name.
Oh, that is beautiful. And Thomas wasn't there when Jesus walked through the walls and revealed himself. And so maybe he was a doer. Maybe he was busy doing and he couldn't stay shut up in the room.
Right.
But he also, in his grief, he needs proof.
That's right.
So Jesus knows that he needs to see that the nail holes in his hands and
That's right.
his side. So.
That's right. And that all of these things are normal. All the ways that people experience grief are normal and they're different. And I love it that we can see that in the Bible. We can see that in our book and on grief and grieving. In my office, I observe several symptoms that are super common that we're going to talk about today.
Okay.
We often try to put grief in a box. Like people expect to cry.
Right.
Although some people try not to cry, but we do know that lots of people cry with grief.
Right.
And that's one symptom of grief. It's just not the only one.
In the book on grief and grieving, the authors write about having difficulty sleeping.
Yes, that's super common. And really what I hear so much is people can get to sleep, but they wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and they are thinking and thinking and thinking about so many different things and they just can't get back to sleep. So interrupted sleep is very common.
I know that Jeff even experienced that after he lost his folks. And even in, I think, life experiences, you grieve and you can't
That's
sleep.
right.
It doesn't have to be that you lost someone
That's
to
right.
experience this difficulty sleeping.
That's exactly right. feelings of detachment, this idea that I don't even feel connected to my body. I feel like I'm kind of floating. I feel like I'm in a group of people, but I feel very other than them.
Right.
Just recently, one of my first therapist, Margaret, that I talked about in our first season.
Praise her.
I know. She lost her husband of over 50 years about 10 months ago. And she recently said on Facebook that she feels like she detached from her body for like 6 months.
Oh my goodness.
And so it's just she's a super intentional person, did the grief share group and everything, but still just felt this sense of not being herself. That's
I know
really
that,
common.
for my mom, losing my dad, she had never lived alone
Right.
her whole life.
Yes.
And now she is. So I can imagine that part of that disassociation is that you've never done this thing before.
That's right. Yeah, you've never done this thing. People are not the best versions of themselves in grief. I know of a story who, a couple, they were separated to divorce. And this man found himself spying on his wife.
Oh my God.
Like, that's not who he is.
No,
right?
of course not.
But we do the oddest things. Yeah. And then there's a lot of mental struggles with grief, worry, anxiety, frustration. People wonder about their finances, about their kids, about the house, all kinds of things.
Right. So what is the difference between worry and anxiety?
Oh, that's such a good question. Worry tends to be about things that are in reality.
Okay.
Well, how am I going to pay the bills? Can I keep this house? Right? Like this is kind of reality. And it tends to sort of stay in your head. Whereas anxiety tends to affect our bodies. We might feel tension.
Okay.
We may have heart palpitations. We may have restless sleep with anxiety. So things like that. And then anxiety tends to be a little bit more catastrophic. Like I'm going to lose that. I'm going to lose everything.
Right.
I will never have a partner again. I will never be happy again.
Right.
My whole life is going to fall apart. And so anxiety tends to be more catastrophic than worry.
I know when I had my first miscarriage, I wondered, will I ever be able to have a baby?
Of course. Yeah. But that seems really connected to worry. Like that's a really reasonable question, when you've lost a child.
Right. So worry, it takes place more in your head, and anxiety comes out in your body. So,
and it's a thinking thing. It is mental, but it also is affecting your body.
Okay. That's helpful to clarify that.
Yeah. And then frustration is also very common. We tend to lose our margin.
Oh.
In day-to-day life, we usually can handle some traffic.
Sure.
We can handle the kids being upset about something or some kind of disappointment. But when we're going through grief, our margins are gone, and we can find ourselves very easily frustrated, snapping at people that we really love, that we would never talk to that way if we were ourselves. And of course, there's this really funny scene in Father of the Bride.
One of my favorite movies.
Yes, where Steve Martin is over it. He is over the cost of this wedding, and we see him go into the grocery store and he's buying hot dogs and buns, and he's like, I'm not paying for one more bun than I have hot dogs for. And he rips open packages and he leaves these extra buns, there. And what we know is really happening is he's grieving his daughter growing up and getting married, but it comes out in this really funny, frustrating way that he doesn't have margin to pay for extra buns.
That's right. That's great.
Another thing that people don't talk enough about is how exhausting grief is.
Oh, I remember after my dad died, I called you and I couldn't even put thoughts together. My brain was foggy and I was exhausted. And you said grief is hard work.
It is such hard work. It's exhausting. People need to lower the bar for themselves, practice their own compassion, take the nap, put things off until a later time, because getting through grief, you just need to rest. And people are surprised to hear that they will be simply tired because they're missing someone or they've gone through some type of significant loss.
Right. And honestly, there is so much to do.
Yes.
And so you can get caught up in that. But to know that you're already going to be exhausted.
Yeah.
To allow some space for that.
That's right. That's right. And then another thing that's common is weight loss. People often just don't feel like eating.
Yeah.
So they lose their appetite and they may lose some weight during that season. We hope it doesn't get to be like a problem.
Right.
But it's just another part of your body going, yeah, I don't feel normal. I don't feel like myself. I don't feel like eating right now.
I know, too, that if you lose a spouse, mealtime is a special time.
Yeah.
And so not having them there is a situation where it's abnormal.
Yes.
And it's not an event anymore.
Right.
And so you've got to adjust to that. And not eating sometimes is a way to just live.
Yeah. Or even avoid 3 times a day that I used to be with the person that I love.
Right. Oh, that's good. So in your office, what do you tell people to do when...
Yeah, I encourage people to at least have some kind of smoothie to make sure they're eating some kind of nourishment, even putting something in their fridge that they know they're going to want to eat. So because you do need energy to get through the grief as well. Another physical symptom is actually pain. People don't realize, so we call it somatic experience, that our bodies feel pain during grief.
Okay.
I can remember my dad, when I was in school to become a therapist, my dad had been gone for 13 years.
Okay.
But I was learning so much more about grief and about feelings and somatic experience. And on the anniversary of his passing, I brought a picture of the two of us up to the counseling center where I was doing my internship. And I just shared the story of his passing with some of my friends. And I remember feeling so much pain in my chest. I actually went to the bathroom and stood in the stall and held my chest. And I cried. And I was shocked that 13 years later, my body was still holding something like that.
Right.
But it's actually just really, really normal. And then one last thing I want to mention is about time. People have, it's like time is odd when you experience loss. People wonder, what did I do between the time that the sun came up and the sun went down?
Right.
And it kind of takes me back to what we talked about in the last episode with depression, how people may just sit and stare.
Yes.
And it is just time. It feels disoriented.
Okay.
And it's just another thing that's really, really normal, but you don't feel yourself.
And I imagine that's a part of, I can't get out of bed.
Yes.
Or I find myself in the kitchen and I don't even remember being there. I don't even remember walking there.
Yes.
Or, unloading the dishwasher and then you're off to do something else or whatever, and you notice the dishwasher doors open.
Yes.
It's just...
That's right.
It's discombobulated.
That's right. And I think it also contributes to that thing about people not eating.
Yeah.
Is if time is messed up in your mind, it's like, did I eat?
Right.
I don't know. I don't know who I am right now.
Right. And all of that is normal.
And all of that is normal.
So this is a lot.
It is.
It's a lot to hold. So when should you go see a doctor?
It's such a great question. And I just encourage people to give yourself the gift of having a checkup, right? If you are like, I'm noticing these pains, I'm not sleeping, I'm losing weight, maybe something's really wrong with me. And if you've just lost someone to a sickness, your fear of sickness may be heightened.
That makes sense.
So it's okay. Go to the doctor and say, this is what's going on with me. The doctor may be like, I think it's just the grief, or, hey, let's do some blood work, just so that you feel like we've covered all the bases.
Right. I know that after my dad passed, my mom, was taking her blood pressure and it had elevated.
Sure.
And so she went to the doctor.
Yeah.
And he prescribed her an antidepressant.
Okay.
Because she also wasn't eating.
Yeah.
And she wasn't sleeping well.
Yeah.
And she had decided that she didn't want to take an antidepressant.
Sure.
Which is fine, but
Yeah.
she kept the prescription
Yeah.
just in case.
That's right.
She needed it.
Yeah.
So I applauded her for just going to the doctor
Yes.
instead of being silent and then letting her mind race.
Yes, I love that. It's controversial about taking meds when someone's in grief.
Okay, so tell me about that.
Okay. We know that our bodies need to grieve, and so many doctors will want you to go through some of the grief process before they'll consider prescribing an antidepressant.
Okay.
And so, but if it gets to this point where it's like you aren't getting out of bed, it's been 3 months. I can't be around people. I'm losing so much weight. I can't eat.
Right.
Then we would encourage you. Maybe it is time to do something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, tell me, when is a good time to see a therapist?
I think you could make an appointment to see a therapist as soon as you've experienced a loss.
Okay.
You can wait as long as you want, but there is no like, oh, wait a month, wait 2 months.
Right.
It's really nice for people to have a confidential space to say everything that's on their heart and mind, and people will actually experience relief from some of these symptoms we've been talking about just because they have a place to let things out.
I know that it seems like a good idea to share some of the intimate things that are in your mind with somebody who is not a family member.
That's right.
Because sometimes you don't want to share every part of your life
That's right.
with your children
Right.
or
That's right. Well,
your friends.
and they have their own grief.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so they have their own grief process. So by going to someone who is outside of that system, it's like you're not burdening anybody. There's not going to be a reaction that somebody else may not think it's okay for you to
That is
feel
so
however you
smart.
feel. Yes.
Right.
And then you're going to be having somebody that's saying, you know what, this is actually really normal, giving you some homework assignments to help you work through some of this grief, some of, just helping you normalize and see that, okay, I am going to be okay someday, but I have to walk this hard road.
Right. That's such a good word.
Yeah. So in wrapping up, we've talked about how normal it is to experience a lot of different symptoms with grief.
Right.
We've talked about the value of going to see a therapist, the possibility of seeing a doctor, and we really hope that this has helped people to understand themselves a little bit better and to give themselves more room to be kind and compassionate to themselves. So if you have experienced that this is valuable information, we hope that you will share your experience on social media and that maybe you'll share this with your friends. So thanks for tuning back in with us.
We hope today's conversation brought you comfort and insight on your journey toward healing. If you found this episode helpful, be sure to subscribe and share with a friend who might benefit. Remember, you can follow along on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Pella TV. We want to thank Side by Side Ministries and Adri and Marla Gruneweg for their financial support. This podcast was created by Donna Durham and Christy Vandervoort. It was produced and recorded by Monty Godike.